Hi, this is Korean Choices in Criminology, a podcast describing the life stories of prominent scholars in criminology, created by Network Safe Places at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. We would like to gain insights into their professional journeys, the factors and motivations behind their entry into the field of criminology, and their career accomplishments. We hope these interviews can serve as a source of inspiration for you who is a student or early career scholar. During these interviews, we aim to discover their past and present research passions. If you have comments or suggestions, please contact us via our website. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello everybody, my name is Jonathan Abraham. I am part of the Urban and Community Safety Research Group, as well as the Network Safe Places. And I have the pleasure today to introduce today's guest, Joseph Donnermeyer, who is a professor emeritus at the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State University, but also an adjunct professor at both the West Virginia University and the University of New England. And he is very active in the field of rural criminology, with over 80 peer-reviewed journal articles, 15 book chapters, over 200 paper presentations, as well as co-author and author of 8 books on the subject. And first of all, I would just like to say thank you for joining us for this interview.
It's exciting to do this sort of an interview and to kind of reflect back on a career. And as you mentioned, I've been retired. I've been retired since 2014. But the joy of working with younger scholars will keep me going. And that's why I show up at annual meetings like this one in San Francisco for the American Society of Criminology.
Yeah, thank you. And then, like I said, it's a great pleasure and honor to be able to hear about your trajectory in your career. But first off, perhaps now I did a little of an introduction, but could you maybe in your own words introduce who are you, where are you from?
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. First of all, I was born in Covington, Kentucky, and spent my first 22 years or so and in Kentucky. I'm a city boy. I could see downtown Cincinnati, the skyline, from my bedroom window. I had no idea what rural was until I got to the University of Kentucky as a graduate student. And environmental studies were new at the time. Earth Day was new at the time. And as a result, what was happening in the Appalachian coal fields was of interest to me. It was fairly left-leaning at that time, but it got me involved in rural studies, not rural criminology, but just rural studies. But during my first job in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue University, the department chair started asking me to do some studies of crime in rural areas. He assumed, very naively, that anybody with a sociology degree took criminology courses. So not only I don't have a rural background, I never took a criminology course in my life. And so I end up as what? A rural criminologist.
Right.
But I did begin to develop some plans for research. But soon after, I moved to the Ohio State University, where they had a funded National Rural Crime Prevention Center. And that's when my actual empirical work began.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So you, I'd say like this, like this interest for rural, like, was it anything like specifically like that really like intrigued you about this?
I think what intrigued me was it was rural in general, and the idea that so few studies in criminology were conducted in about rural dimensions of crime, which I always found interesting since until about 1917, 1920 or so, the population in the United States was in fact rural and agricultural, yet criminology in the United States started at the Chicago School of Sociology and was always urban biased. And I find that quite ironic.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I see. And was there any, I'd say both opportunities and challenges in becoming this rural criminologist. Were there, challenges you had to overcome, or were there opportunities that were you seized or had to?
There were the opportunities of being a scholar interested in a unique topic that very few other people were doing. But then that challenge was having to sustain the role of a lone wolf, the only person who was doing research in this area. And that was difficult. I almost decided to shift into other areas, but for some reason, I used to describe rural crime studies as the pit bull that keeps pulling on my pants and won't let go. And then what really began to connect me to other scholars and to allow rural criminology to take off is, ironically, social media. The ability to email somebody at a distant place, later on to Zoom, and etc., allowed then all of us lone wolves at various universities to coalesce and identify. And that's what it is today.
Interesting, like, because I feel like that kind of almost like reflects a bit about rural crimes development in some ways. So with technology, the distance and so on might diminish in importance, perhaps.
Yes, you would think that social media would create a mass society where there are no rural-urban differences, but in fact, place makes a difference in the context in which crime experiences are expressed. And that is how I approach the topic. There are no rural specific crimes, that is, rural exclusive crimes. Agricultural crime may be the closest to that, that is exclusively rural, but every other type of crime, robbery, homicide, violence, burglary, etc., are crimes that occur in cities and in rural areas. But the context of the community where it occurs varies. That's what makes the difference and allows rural criminology to develop and be a specialization today.
Okay. So you have been already perhaps discussing this, but what would you say then that rural criminology is to you? What does that entail?
To me, rural criminology is the study of crime in rural localities. Rural localities are defined as places with smaller populations and smaller population densities that are not next to a larger place. Now, I define it that way for a very specific reason. When I first started in criminology, there were and there remain today, all kinds of stereotypes of rural, and for that matter, urban, so that we have these dichotomies that are totally useless, like Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, and peasant versus the metropole, and other things like that. And I go, no, throw all of those out. The only thing that defines rural is population size. Everything else, the economic characteristics, the cultural characteristics, the social characteristics, vary from one part of the world to the other. And I know this now because I'm completing a monograph for Rutledge on farm crime. And there are chapters on US, Australia, Europe, Africa, unfortunately not enough for South America or Asia. And the context in which the same crimes occur vary for each of the continents that are covered in the book. And that's what makes rural so interesting, is all of that variability and how things get expressed. For instance, farm crime, and I mean by farm, herding, everything, pastoralist, etc. Farm crime as it occurs in northeast Nigeria is far different in the context, but it's the same crime as would happen in the state of Texas here in the United States.
Yeah, that's I'd say from my research, I've also already seen that, like you said, it's very, very different in nature. But so yeah, it's very true. And how would you say then, since now you've worked with rural crime like as a researcher for a long time, how do we perhaps make a change in or like make an effect on practice also? Like how does research affect practice?
That is a tough challenge for scholars in any field of criminology. How do we make a difference in terms of practice? And the best way to do that is collaborative partnerships with police organizations and other criminal justice agencies. And because I'm completing this book, the farm crime examples are the best. For instance, in South Africa, there is a forum of farm organizations, the national police, and scholars at several of the South African universities that meet quarterly to talk about trends in farm crime and also to discuss the political context of crime against farms in that country. Because there are debates about the continued impact of apartheid and the lack of land reform today and how that relates to attacks on farm families. And of course there are some far right-wing groups that think this is a form of genocide, and the scholars down there are saying, now wait a minute now, black farmers are being attacked as much as white farmers. It's the opportunity for the crime, the amount of money one can make. And they are organized attacks, so they tend to be a bit more violent than an opportunistic theft would be. And so they talk about these things, and then they work with law enforcement on how to reduce vulnerability and to also get the right information out to farm organizations.
So, because you talked also about working with police, have you done so in the U.S., or do you know any examples of how working in rural areas?
When we first started working at Ohio State, we put out a series of brochures, I think 15 of them, on various aspects of farm crime, and they were used by dozens and dozens of local law enforcement agencies here in the United States. It helped with the organization and the sustainability of farm security details within the Florida State Police and the Texas Rangers, whatever they're called in Texas. In Australia, also the work of a colleague that I did a lot of publication with, Elaine Barclay, led to the rejuvenation of the New South Wales livestock theft squad, where they investigate and attempt to provide information to farmers, especially in outback areas where they're quite vulnerable because of the size of their operations, and also because now of climate change and how that's affecting their vulnerability to drought, fires, etc.
Right.
So there are examples of this throughout different regions of the world. I wish there were more examples of how criminologists would work directly with practitioners. In general, I find that law enforcement officers anywhere in the world who are dedicated to their job appreciate academic research when it's presented to them in a way that is practical and usable.
Right. Okay. Just a follow-up. Do you think there are differences in how you have to work, perhaps with more like rural police compared to more urban police, or is it?
I don't know if there is a rural-urban difference in working with law enforcement. I think it's the relevance of what you do for the particular agency with whom you're speaking to, the personnel there. I've had delightful experiences with police officers in various countries. In fact, they often give me the ideas for theory and research. If you're not in the field, I don't know how you can do criminology research. And so I'll give you my favorite example, because in about a year I'm going to begin to write a book on this. But I was with Elaine Barclay in New South Wales near a town called Lightning Ridge. It also produces rubies. It's on the edge of the outback. If you head west out of Lightning Ridge and you don't have water, you're not likely to survive. If you head east, you get into more populated areas. So we're driving back, having completed 2 interviews in one day, which was very productive because of the distances that had to be traveled. One farmer said that his sheep are continuously stolen by his neighbor, who is also a farmer. Why don't you report it to law enforcement? Well, because I want to be able to go to the pub in town and not be considered to have daubed in my neighbor. Yeah, okay, we thought about that a little bit. Then we were interviewing a police officer, and that same day, and he said, I don't often respond seriously to reports from farmers of theft unless they're full-time and not part-time, because those folks are driving out from the city and they're not really part of the community. And besides that, the last report I got of somebody who might have been stealing sheep, his wife is on Shire Council. And so we're driving back. It's getting dim. It's in an open range area with both cow and sheep jutting in front of the car, because, and kangaroos, by the way, because they're trying to munch on the grass near the road because it's more moist. And suddenly I say to Elaine, you know, when we get back and we try to write an article with Pat Jobs, who is well retired now, I said, he loves the concept of a mine shaft, and let's fool this guy and write about how a mine shaft causes crime, because that's what we heard today. You know, wife is on Shire Council. I don't want to daub in my neighbor so I can go to a pub. And I suddenly realized social disorganization theory doesn't know what it's talking about. It's organization, not disorganization. Yeah. And so that's what I'll be writing about in 2 years. And if you don't get out into the field and have these silly little examples happen to you, and then put a framework on them, frankly, you're not a good scholar. I wrote in the farm crime book, in the final chapter, that it is incorrectly attributed to Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. And I said, too many criminologists basically say, let them eat beta coefficients. Nothing wrong with statistics. I've used a lot of statistics, and log linear down to descriptive, but too many people use it as a crutch, and they're not really out in the field doing real scholarship.
It's an interesting, fun story, but yeah. Okay then. So now you have had a long career within criminology, rule criminology, and multi-crew criminology as well. But what would you say to those who might be in the beginning of their career, or just researchers and those in general?
When I was a visiting academic at the University of Białystok, Faculty of Law, back in October 2024, I had to do a seminar on publishing in English language journals, because English is the hegemonic language for publishing. And my first statement to my audience was, start publishing as early as you can, for 2 reasons. One are the metrics for career advancement are far more micromanaging than they were when I started. And second of all, for many people, their travel budgets depend on getting on a point system nowadays. In fact, I just recently had a scholar ask me about publishing in a journal, and do you think they could turn it around before the end of 2025 because I need the points for that year, or I can't go to the European Society of Criminology meetings? That would have been unheard of as I was growing up as a criminologist. So I think the key is start early with developing your ideas and beginning to write. And if you back up from that, it also means start early in using a conceptual framework of some kind to contextualize what you're doing and how you're writing about it, and not simply using a theory for window dressing. But I know for the International Journal of Rural Criminology, we'll get articles that say, I borrowed from broken windows and routine activities, but you never explained to us, as you wrote the article, exactly what you borrowed. You simply threw out names. So please revise and resubmit. And so I think it's starting early with getting an idea of what you want to do, the theoretical frameworks you're going to have, recognizing that as you develop your career, you may find that what you first started with was naive and incorrect based upon your perspective 20, 25 years later. It's okay. Go ahead, start.
Yeah, that's good. How would you then, from your perspective now, like if you would just look ahead, 20 years ahead, how do you think rural criminology will develop?
I think it's going to continue to develop and grow larger. Despite the fact that the proportion of the world's population that is rural is getting near 40%. It was, for the first time in human history, below 50%, and I believe 2004. So that trend has been more and more of the world's population lives in cities. But what that means, however, also is that there are more and more rural people. Rural is not growing as fast as the world's population, but it's still getting larger and larger. It's getting more interconnected with urban areas. With the development of minerals and energy and minerals, such as for a cell phone, there are more and more rural areas where mining and other extractive industries are having a real negative impact. And so rural people, even if they're not growing as fast, by virtue of their relationship with urban populations and the development of cities, they are important people and important communities for us to study.
Okay. Do you think that, because you said that there's no real phenomena that's exclusive to crime types that exclusive to rural, but do you think that we still need to develop some kind of rural theory surrounding these type of crimes and so on, or is it?
Absolutely. I think we do need rural-based theories. We need one that is a bit comprehensive, that is, would allow for the synthesis of rural literature for comparative purposes. And that is probably a theory of place, a theory of crime and place, that can look at how, well, for instance, farm crime, what I'm working on, has both similarities and differences in context across huge areas of the world. Let's see, we'll pick Supraza in Poland, near the border with Belarus, all the way to Lightning Ridge and other areas in Australia, all the way over to Moncton in New Brunswick, on and on like that. But here's what we also need. We need middle range theories. Now, I grew up with sociology theory, and there was a sociologist named Robert Merton, who was well known in the 1950s and 1960s. And at that point, sociologists were still reacting to from sociologists and philosophers of the 1800s who were attempting to do theories of the evolution of human society, broad, way too broad theories. And so he wrote about, no, we need to have theories that speak to specific domains. And that's called middle range theory. And rural criminology has a great potential to develop middle range theories. I'll mention 3 that I know about and that I'm familiar with. One is called primary socialization theory, and it is about the interconnectedness of statuses of rural youth within communities, either with high, low poverty, etc. Kind of almost like structural antecedents model of the theory I don't like, social disorganization theory. But they're predicting substance use, especially experimental use among rural youth from the western states. And a lot of focus on Hispanic and Native American groups, but also anyone. That's one. Another one is been published in Criminology, very statistical. It's a step up from the theories, structural antecedent and systemic theories in social disorganization. It's called civic community theory. And it was developed by a fellow down in Louisiana State University who became a provost, which means that he no longer publishes. Matt Lee. And I know him. He's actually a rural sociologist like me who got involved with criminology. And that theory is a very good way of doing statistical work. What is the rate of local ownership of businesses? What is the rate of voting? What is the rate of participation in religious organizations, churches? And so all of those things would predict a more civic community. And if it's a more civic community, it likely has lower rates of official crime. Yeah. The third middle range theory, which I think is a great one, is with a wonderful colleague I work with, Walter de Keseretti, and I'm part of his Center for Violence Research at West Virginia University. And it is a theory about how patriarchal norms in rural settings influence violence against rural women, especially with husband and wives and partners. And we're currently working on a book that looks at how fracking and other forms of energy development don't cause disorganization. They actually reinforce the patriarchal norms that are already there, hence bringing up the level of violence. But it's not disrupting established patterns, which would assume that rural people are always peaceful and they know each other, so therefore there's no crime. And in fact, the studies in the past would have shown that if you attempt an armed robbery in a rural community, you're likely not to get away with it. But if you beat up your girlfriend or your wife, you're likely to have a local clergy who will ignore it or say that it's your fault, lady. Law enforcement who will not take it seriously. And men who will meet at like a veterans hall and talk about how to get away with it. Yeah. It's all Gemeinschaft. It's all very tightly organized forms of patriarchal norms that create this level of violence, which doesn't show up in police statistics. And so that's another one, along with primary socialization theory, civic community theory, and this one is called male peer support theory. And those are 3 great mid-range theories in rural. We could use another couple dozen.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you for those 3 at least. Now more not. Just instead of looking forward, if we look back in time, then do you have any advice for your 20-year-old Joe?
for a 20-year-old Joe. Well, when Joe was 20 years old, he was at Thomas More College learning sociological theory and majoring and minoring in philosophy, and had no idea that he would ever get involved in rural.
Yeah.
So I think my advice to Joe back then would have been that, I know, I'm going to shift slightly. When I got to The Ohio State University, a sociologist, now I was in the College of Agriculture, but I got to know this fellow, and he kept advising me that longevity makes your career, because he knew I was relatively isolated, and he was advising me to stick with it. And I almost did not, but I'm glad I did, and I appreciate his advice. So scholars today, if they're 20 like I was, need to remember that their scholarship will develop over time and will slide from one topic to another. I was a major in community sociology, and I would describe that as like a piece of luggage that you can pick up and take anywhere, any subject. The concept of community, concept of place. And so no matter what I was studying, in either now or in the future or in the past, I can use that framework. In fact, I'll tell you something that has nothing to do with criminology, is that I also do another type of research, and it is on Amish communities. It's the exact same framework. In fact, in the Security Journal, I just had an article published in a special issue edited by Vanya Sakato on putting a criminological lens on when Amish are victimized by crime.
Interesting.
First time in my whole career I ever merged the two things I do.
Very interesting. Okay. I don't know. Like I said, this has been a very interesting conversation, and I'm also a bit like, not selfish, but this is like, I'm very interested in real crime, of course, and so on. So it's been very interesting. But before we conclude this interview, do you have anything that you want to just share with our viewers back home there?
I think what I would share with viewers is that networking is extremely important in any field, specialty of criminology. Criminology may be concentrated at certain well-renowned universities, but most of us do not work at those particular places. We may know those individuals, and we may read their stuff, and they may read our stuff, but normally our networking is at a European Society of Criminology, or joining and I'll put in a plug here, the International Society for the Study of Rural Crime. Or if you join the American Society of Criminology, join the Division of Rural Criminology. If you join the European Society, join the Rural Crime Working Group, and learn to network with other scholars. And it will add depth to what you do, and you won't even realize how much you've learned. Oh, and I'll add one more thing.
Yeah.
Most of that good stuff of learning from colleagues doesn't happen in a session. It happens at the conference bar.
Right. Yeah, and I hope, since we're both here in San Francisco for this the ASC conference, I'm hoping to keep on discussing with you.
I'll buy the first round.
Yeah, I'll buy the second and third round. But yeah, yeah. That's I think that's all the questions I have to you. Like I said, very interesting conversation. Very thankful for having the opportunity to interview you, and to our viewers over there back home. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.